Welcome back to Set in Stone. My name is Stone Mims. I'm the senior political editor for Linux and Parker, and I'm honored to be sitting here with Rita Coburn, an accomplished filmmaker and producer. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, and I'm really happy to be with you. Thank you.
So you got a pretty impressive documentary coming up on the life of W.E.B. Du Bois, and I want to talk all about that. But before we sort of get into your most recent work, I've had the pleasure of watching some of your stuff in the past, like your documentaries on Remembering 47th Street, and
Wow, you're going back.
yeah, all the way back, and more recently, like in 2016, you had the Maya Angelou doc. So my first question for you is, what draws you to these moments in history? What sort of compels you to talk about stories like these from the past, from our past?
Well, I have to tell you, when I was a little girl growing up south of Chicago in a little small town, we had chickens on the block. We were 4 blocks by 9. But the people around me and the people in the city, my aunts and uncles, I thought were just wonderful people. They were just blessings to me. And when I looked on the TV as I got into the early maybe 70s, I didn't see those people. I saw caricatures of people. And I had this kind of Pippi Longstocking attitude, and I was kind of having a little argument with God. Where are my people? I don't know this person that's on TV. Uh, no disrespect, but Dynamite and all that. I don't know who these people are. Where's my Uncle Sport? Where's my Mama May May? These are hardworking, God-fearing people that just make me the person that I could be. And so I really felt, I heard in my spirit, put them on there yourself, do something about it. And as I was going along, I wrote a novel, and the novel had a lot to do with my own personal life at the time. But just like in Du Bois's life and in our lifetime, different forms of media were coming our way as Black people. First off, we weren't the ones putting ourselves on television. Other people were putting us on television with their point of view. It wasn't until years later, that decades, that we would take that agency. And so I grew up in that time constraint. And so I'm a little girl growing up in, like in the early 70s, and I'm interested in who we are. I didn't have African American history courses. In fact, I was taught in the integrated school that I went to in 1968 that Martin Luther King was a bad person, that
Right.
he dreamed things that were made up. And, we were very segregated. It was a very racist culture. We had the Dick and Jane books for first, second, and third grade. And it was our blue collar parents that fought to get us to have better books and therefore integrate into a school system that really didn't want us.
Mhm.
So at that particular point, as I started doing stories, I think in my own spirit, I just came committed to doing stories about us that were positive.
Mhm.
And I started doing local documentaries. And that's where you get Remembering 47th Street in 2000 from, which was really looking at what happened was a public television station said, can you do a documentary about the South Side of Chicago?
Mhm.
And I thought, and my response was, how about I do one on one street? And
Right.
that became 47th Street. And that was the street that my parents had told me became the hotbed of the city. In the medians in between the streets, people would stay up all night, go to sleep there, get up and go to work. There would be people, Josephine Baker, and even the Beatles came there once at a point to see what was going on in that area. And that was the Chicago I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
So that's how that happened. And that was a very early documentary of mine. And so I cut my teeth doing African Americans in agriculture, African Americans in architecture, um, different how people were fighting against the unions.
Mhm.
Um, I did those things, and every time I did a documentary, I learned more about myself, my family, and the people around me.
Right. Well, let's talk more specifically because now that documentary came out in 2000. Now we're in 2026. You're still at this sort of retelling and carving out these stories for us. What specifically brought you to Du Bois? What was that process like?
Well, you mentioned Maya Angelou, and that's kind of how I got here.
Hmm.
So in I worked for Oprah Radio in 2004, 2006 to 2010. And during that time period, I spent 1 week a month with Maya Angelou in her home. And during the course of that time, getting these stories together for Oprah Radio, she talked to me about a lot of people, and she started talking to me about Du Bois. And I could tell that she was really disappointed that I didn't know much about him, and I didn't.
Hmm.
And so she had an extensive library. I started to poke around, and then I forgot about it a little because we have all these other historical figures that we keep bringing out. Du Bois wasn't one of them.
Right.
But after I did the Maya Angelou, I then did the Marian Anderson documentary, Marian Anderson, The Whole World in Her Hands, for American Masters. And I noticed that they had another documentary as soon as I finished that one in like 2022 that they were looking for a director for, and it was on W.E.B. Du Bois. And I thought, this is my chance to really make good on my personal promise to Maya Angelou to learn about this man and also to expand the kind of way that I feel about my people. Who is this man?
Hmm.
And so I approached it with a real openness because in this society, we have reduced him to sound bites, the talented 10th, and people were turning up their noses. He had a beef with Booker T. Washington. He had a problem with Marcus Garvey. Well, W.E.B. Du Bois took no prisoners. He took on 7 US presidents in his lifetime. So as I began to learn more about him, I thought I really have to dig deep because he was deep, and I have to tell everyone about him because he's fallen into some obscurity. It's not that you don't hear about him, but you basically hear sound bites.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. And it's funny because this is a man who lives for nearly a century, 1868, 1963,
Mm.
carries us from that sort of post, emancipation moment right to the March on Washington. But you sort of my next question you kind of touched on a little bit, but I want to hear you expand. I feel like one of the most memorable themes of W.E.B. Du Bois, Rebel with a Cause, is the importance of being in control of your own stories and the importance of your representation, because Du Bois was, adamant that Black people needed to be control of storytelling. So, as a filmmaker, how do you relate to this idea of, representing your own story?
I think it's critical. And I think that we still don't have the weight in the industry to do it as much as it should be done. I think that most recently, a lot of the documentaries that are being greenlit and being supported may take one aspect of a person, or they might want to use more cinema verite, or I think we're being pigeonholed in what is acceptable to the industry by and large. I think that historical documentaries are being played down. And that is a function of this society, even in the industry, even in liberal places,
Mhm.
even in our own Black culture, of not embracing our history. We want to say some people are trying to take our history away. Well, they can't take it away if you teach it, tell it, and promote it yourself. But some of that promotion of our own history is being frowned upon in different ways by certain sectors of not only the general population, it's easy to blame them, but also us. So why don't you know about Du Bois? Why didn't I know about Du Bois? Why was Du Bois reduced to a soundbite? It's
Mhm.
systemic, and it's part of racism, and it's part of the self-hate process that we're still trying to get away from.
Mhm. No, I definitely agree. I had to go to college before, paid several thousands of dollars before Du Bois and many of these other big voices in the Harlem Renaissance became apparent to me. So I definitely agree that the pedagogy, the decision of who gets to be in the classroom and who doesn't, is a part of that structural racism.
It
Um,
really is.
but speaking to that sort of point of representation further, this is a film that has a kind of like a all-star cast of scholars like Henry Louis Gates and Viola Davis narrating. What was it like to work with all of these people across fields to compile and narrate this epic on Du Bois's life?
Thank you so much for that. Here's what I felt like Du Bois is heavy, deep, and I'm not going to take any of that away from him.
Mhm.
However, I'm telling you about a man who was born in 1868, and we're sitting in 2026.
Yeah.
I realize that I need to put something to that medicine to get you to come and look at it. And I can't do, uh, I don't want to do animation. I want you to see the Black faces of people who lived at that time.
Right.
I don't want to do some of uh, the different bells and whistles. I want it to be a solid historical piece. But when I begin to break the story, to find the element of the story that would pull people in and at the same time be of his own spirit, what I found was it was his writing. So he had written at least 21 books. We're still finding things. He had written an article every 10 days for 24 years for the Crisis magazine, the magazine of the NAACP, which he helped co-found. So then it's his writing to which we can look to find his inner thoughts. Writing is very personal. And so once I knew that it was the writing, and I looked for audio for him talking, and there's some of that, but not enough, then I knew that I needed people to read his words. When
Right.
I decided that it needed to be men, it needed to be Black men, and I didn't use that function that we sometimes have, let women read too. I
Mhm.
wanted it to be Black men because at the time that I was doing this in this society, I felt like a Black man couldn't sell a cigarette if he was poor, couldn't go get Skittles if he was young, and couldn't ride a bike in
Mhm.
his neighborhood. And I wanted Black men. And so once I started looking for Black men, one person led me to another. And Courtney B. Vance actually has done the two audio books of David Levering Lewis's Pulitzer Prize winning books on Du Bois. So David Levering Lewis made that connection for me. And this film pulls together more Black support than I've ever had in a film. And I've been doing this, as you pointed out, for some years. But Black people came forward and said, I know this person. Let me introduce you to this person. If this is the direction you want to go in, we're still raising money for the publicity of this film. But at the same time, Black people started writing checks. Black people said, we want this story told. And so I had that kind of support, and that support helped lead me to the celebrity voices. Now, Common I had worked with the Maya Angelou, and I just knew that this politically would be something that he would embrace, and he did. And then getting to Viola Davis, I felt that she's one of the most important Black female voices we have right now in Hollywood and in acting. And I felt like she would do this if she knew about it, and we were able to get to her. And and I want to say that Jeffrey Wright is somewhat of a polymath himself. He loves history, and when you look at the pieces that he's done, uh, this would work for him. And one of my executive producers said, "We're going after him for you." And so this was really collaborative. When people understood that I wanted to use his words and I needed contemporary people to voice the words, we put on our thinking hats and went for it. And I'm ecstatic with the group that we've been able to pull together.
Mhm. No, even just watching it and seeing this cast of Black intellectuals of people coming together to tell their story, it symbolically very much felt very Du Boisian to me. This was his image of the Niagara movement. This was this idea of, oh, like, through, this group of educated, highly sophisticated and, artistic Black people could come together and do something. And so it felt like a piece of the legacy was really coming throughout of the film. But you used the term polymath just a moment ago, and that sort of leads into my next sort of line of thought. This film sort of gives us a survey of Du Bois's life from going to a student, just, a boy who is gifted, to becoming an educator, leading the classroom, to a sociologist and a researcher, and, publisher of children's literature, to a science fiction writer. Just the scope of, this, everything that he was able to do. So in your opinion, just from, getting to know Du Bois, what forces, whether that be nurture or nature, do you think contributed to the emergence of such a gifted, artist, activist, and,
And
polymath?
polymath, as wonderful, as expansive, as intellectual, as global, as respective of art and culture that Du Bois is. Du Bois we could have had 100 Du Boises,
Mm-hmm.
but we had racism instead.
Right.
So what happens is he's born 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, but he's born in Great Barrington.
Right.
And instead of being a person who was from generations where it was illegal to read, he's in a place that his his forefathers have lived for hundreds of years, and for the last 100 years or so been free.
Mm-hmm.
And education in that area of the country, you're in Massachusetts, this is a European education that is basically a prep school education,
Right.
copied after Europe. And there's a high school teacher who says, "I'm going to see how far the Black mind can go if I pour everything into it." Well, now, if you had poured that into 1,000 Blacks,
Right.
we might have 200 Du Boises.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was the combination of nurture, because his family thought, this is our star. This little boy can take us there. It was a time when music wasn't considered, that's going to be your side job. If you were musical, like Marian Anderson, we're pouring everything in it. You got a gift from God. They felt that his intellect was a gift from God, and that it was capital, that it was an investment, and the town invested in him. It was a town that had a very small Black population, but he becomes the valedictorian of that high school class, which is all white except for him.
Mhm.
He tutors these students there. He he writes for papers in New York, even little gossipy columns. He cuts his teeth on these things, and the nurture is that he builds a confidence that he never loses. He doesn't think that there's anybody better than him. He thought, I'll go to Harvard because it's in Massachusetts. It's the best school in this state. So it's up the street. I'm going there. He didn't know that money would stop him.
Mhm.
But he didn't, he was young. And so he didn't have those kind of stipulations. And at the same time, his brilliance is something that says the Black mind has so much to give America today if we would feed it.
I want to take that further. This question further, just getting into what Du Bois's life represents and what his legacy might be, because I think that when we, as Americans, in the digital age and the information age, we have this tendency to think of the history in the past as, very distant from us. And maybe it's because we're taught a lot of this literature, in black and white, right? What relevance do you think Du Bois's ideas and legacies pose today? What do you think, from the way he lived his life, or the way that he sort of, the beliefs that he fought for, what do you think we should still be concerned with today? What do you think his legacy, how do you think it sort of matters to us living in today's world?
I think that we have to take an attitude that we will and can prevail from his confidence book. I think we have to take an attitude that I am the sharpest knife in the drawer. He had that, and he studied. And I think you have to do the work in order to get there, but you can go from good to great at whatever you're doing by putting the time in and by connecting the dots. And you learn that by trying and by failure and by continuing and doing it anyway. Rita Brown, one of our scholars, said that that was his big lesson: do it anyway. The government says you can't do it anyway. The teachers, some of them say you're not smart enough, do it anyway. He did hit roadblocks at Harvard. He of people deciding that he wasn't enough, or he felt the racism, but he did it anyway. And I think that's what he's saying to us during this time. But all of those things that he fought for, we're still struggling for, which is terribly unfortunate. And it speaks to the microaggressions of this country that continue. And if you had a great Barrington frame of mind, we'd all be much further along. It's the same reason he wrote a book to deal with Black Reconstruction, because when we were given the opportunity to govern and to help make this country better than it was, we were doing that. But we have to be honest.
Mhm.
There are roadblocks. There were roadblocks then: lynching, fear, all the things of Jim Crow, all made to make you feel demeaned and small. And he fought against that. That's the do it anyway. You fight against that. And those things are present now. And not only are they present, they've been ramped up over the past few years to try to make us fearful, to call us names, um, to to be violent toward us and get away with it. And it takes something to go against that. Fear is real, but the reality is we're fighting for ourselves, our children, and a culture.
I guess there's a quote that comes up in the film, and a quote that comes up in The Souls of Black Folk. Du Bois describes what you're talking about. He calls it double consciousness, this idea that Black people are always struggling to be both American and to be Black. And he says this in 1903 is when The Souls of Black Folk come out. And I'm curious, just from your lived experience as an African American filmmaker and also the history that you know of working with Du Bois, do you still feel like that term double consciousness, this idea that the Black identity and the American identity are somewhat at odds, do you still find that true, or have we left that behind?
Absolutely, it's true. We haven't left it behind. We aren't in a post situation. We're in a present day situation where double consciousness is now maybe called code switching by some.
Right.
To be accepted for who you are when you walk in the room, Black people are still thinking in various jobs, even in liberal companies, in around privileged people who don't even notice how privileged they're coming off.
Mm-hmm.
It is still happening. It is one microaggression after another that is continuing to hold us back. It has not changed. It has morphed. We have some people who have been able to break through, if you call breakthrough being money. But I remember something some years ago that Eddie Murphy wrote. He was being called the N word walking through a parking lot, and he turned around and somebody said, "Oh, Eddie Murphy," but you were the N word 5 seconds ago.
Mm-hmm.
But now because you have money or you have position or you made me laugh, I didn't really mean that. This is a real unfortunate situation. We still have people that are so intrinsically racist that we stand there with a double consciousness and a twoness and a living behind the veil.
Mm-hmm.
Still and now.
The documentary covers a lot of Du Bois's work. It takes us from his Harvard thesis, the suppression of the African slave trade, and through the Souls of Black Folk, as I mentioned earlier, but also to other projects like Dark Water and this magazine, Brownie Books, where he, is putting on display like Black children and Black youth. Of these projects, which do you think, personally, do you find the most valuable or do you find the most inspiring?
I can't answer that question because I think that this man allowed his mind to breathe. He allowed us to all understand just how enriched the Black mind is. Some of it because of the trauma that we go through, but also because we're creators. And he was able to not just become the first Black PhD from Harvard and show his intellect, but as you say, in the suppression of the slave trade, which is really to just say, if we say it like this, he proved through data that there were a great number of white people in this country that did not believe in slavery and they didn't want it and they thought that it was wrong and that it never had to happen. But the greedy people basically won out. It was a capitalistic venture. And that greed is something that everybody fights with, as your greed versus your integrity, and also your fear versus your integrity. He became fearless and he looked at the greed. Now, when he goes past the suppression of the slave trade, which he does this gifted work that becomes the first in Harvard's historical series, they can't deny his research. He used their research from libraries and from what he had learned in Germany to show the truth of that moment. He then goes with the Souls of Black Folk in 1903. And what you have in all of these books, you can go online and download them for free because they were written so long ago, they're in the public domain. So if you go to the Souls of Black Folk, you have a compilation of essays, of of data-based work, as well as his first piece of fiction, where
Mhm.
he explores the idea of Black people getting an education and then coming back to their town and not being accepted by the Blacks or the whites there. So this is really a higher level of thinking. It's
Mhm.
not just that you get an education, it's that if you get one, how do you fit back with your people and how do you fit in the larger society? We're still dealing with that question. You get your education and you got to go sit with Big Mama and them, and how does that work? And you get your education and you go into this corporation and hit a ceiling when you know as much, if
Mhm.
not more, than most of the people there. And so he works with the soul of Black folks. He deals with this double consciousness, this two-ness, this veil. And he also goes into his beef with Booker T. Washington. He talks about the talented 10th. And in his writing, he gets to the point where he does something like the comet. And the comet is the predecessor to Afrofuturism, where a comet comes out of the sky, uh, obliterates a certain city. It looks like it's basically New York, and only a white man, a white woman, and a Black man are left. And if you think about it, during that time period, to look at a white woman could get you lynched even then, 1920. But the only way these two people can coexist together is that it had to be an apocalypse. It had to be some kind of almost total destruction before they could look at each other as humans. And then when everything comes back as if it were a bad dream, he goes back to being the N word again.
Mhm.
And so he does science fiction, he does romance, he does a children's book, because at that time, Black children were just totally not considered. If Black people weren't considered as human, their children were nothing in the society. And he does a book that teaches them everything from there were Black princesses on the continent of Africa. Look at how they're clothed. This was from ancient times. And you've got Black people scrubbing to get through the day. And he's showing these kids princesses. He's telling them how to brush their teeth. He's telling them that there are people like you in Haiti. He's telling them stories and showing them art. And so what we have is he was known through his writings. I go back to that. The writing was the internet of the day.
Mhm.
You didn't have you first had Frederick Douglass. He was an orator, but when he talked, he could only reach a certain amount of people. Now you had a man who was writing in the Atlantic Monthly, so he was writing to white people, intellectual white people. And then he was writing the Crisis magazine, which was going to Black homes.
Right.
And then he was writing books that were beginning to go around the country and would eventually be international. And then he was putting on plays. And the plays were like precursors to the award shows and these shows where you give a retrospective of someone's life. He was doing that and putting them on in baseball fields.
Mhm.
And I think he really does tell us how expansive the Black mind can be, especially at a time where people were denigrating Black thought
Right.
and comparing us to apes.
Mhm. What I personally admired the most about the documentary, and you've sort of touched on this in your last answers, but you don't sanitize the legacy of Du Bois. The film shows the mistakes and the places where, Du Bois might not have been the best partner, or the places where he might have had some classism that evolves, right? He goes from the talented 10th all the way to Pan-African communism. Like there's you show like a true movement. And so I guess as a storyteller, how do you find the nuance and the grace in stories, especially when audiences, I think of things like cancel culture, and just how easy it is for us to dispose of someone today. What do you think is the value of telling that full rounded story?
I think if we clean up our historical figures, our icons, our celebrities, and don't realize that they just have to get through the day like the rest of us, and all life is divine, and our families are as important as these historical figures because we're with them every day. Do we sit? Do we talk to them? Do we consider that they have a whole life that is not just how they relate to us? And this whole thing about cancel culture is really very unfortunate that someone thinks that they can cancel another person's thoughts or beliefs because they don't jibe with their own.
Right.
I think it's something I'm hoping will pass soon. If you don't want to support someone, you don't have to support them. But how do you get to be what kind of God are you that you get to cancel people? I don't understand that. But as far as I'm concerned with the the person, when you are dealing with a human being versus subject matter, the Vietnam War, what have you, you are dealing with a divine person.
Mm.
You're dealing with a person who gets to be everything that they are. They walk into the room with all their good and all their bad. Du Bois had affairs. Du Bois went against presidents. Du Bois went against other Black people that he didn't agree with. He gets to do all that. It's his life.
Right.
And I tell it because he told it. And even down to the personal things, he wrote it. So I felt like he wanted to become known.
Mhm.
And I think that all of us as individuals, we may not say this, but when you reach a certain maturity, you want people to know who you are. That's how you get a good relationship when people know who you are. You're also trying to discover yourself. And I think that Du Bois was on a journey of continual self discovery. He made, became a self made diplomat because he wanted to discover the world. And he traveled more than people, white or Black, during his lifetime, and maybe even now.
Yeah.
But he also did it with an eye on how is this society working? How are these people doing? And maybe I'll throw my hat in with them. Oops, this isn't working out. And he like Malcolm X, when Malcolm X said, called whites blue-eyed devils, and then said, I got to revise that because all of them aren't blue-eyed devils. And so to have the courage to make a mistake and come out of it and decide, I'll change my mind. That's his right too. And you don't cancel a person because they change their mind.
Mhm. No, and I think that's a beautiful thought, especially when if you compare Du Bois, who had 90 something years of life and had the privilege and the wisdom to change his mind, the privilege of time, right, to sort of go
Yeah.
one stance and another. And I compare him to someone like Malcolm X, who you mentioned, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers. These are all people who die and they're like, before 40.
I,
Yeah,
yeah.
one might wonder how far, you said this earlier, and I thought it was a beautiful quote. Like, what would Du Bois have been if not for racism, if these other barriers weren't preventing him from engaging fully with the polymath aesthetic? If he had gotten, how much of his genius was taken up with the fight, right? And I think about the way that probably applies to every Black genius we've ever had. But one of the things I want to get into as well that you sort of have brought up is Du Bois's conflicts with other Black historical figures at the time. First, starting with Booker T. Washington, and then later Marcus Garvey, who are both titans in their own
Yes.
right at the time. especially Washington. Garvey was always a little bit more controversial. But what do you think we can learn about the fact that all of these guys, had these disagreements very publicly? And, you know, I think there's an irony in that, Du Bois has that disagreement with them and kind of comes around on some of their points later in life. What do we make of this?
Well, let me say something because you said something when you started this about where would we be if these
Hmm.
people have been able to be who they are. Like, where would my fourth grade educated father be if he had have had the advantage of having a college degree?
Hmm.
What in all of our families would people who are on, not that we're the majority of
Right.
this, but Black people on welfare, what would they be if they had just been able to have a different education? So I think that has us stuck in this country, that we're not giving people an equal chance. So we're celebrating 250 years of independence.
Hmm.
For whom and who? Uh, how do you get your rights? Now, to the question of a Booker T. Washington and a Marcus Garvey, again, they get to be who they are. And I would have delved more, but it was Du Bois's story. But Booker T. Washington was enslaved until he was 6 years old. So in his DNA, he knew what it was to be treated as a slave.
Hmm.
And his sights were like, if I can get me, I heard Oprah say this once, that her mother said, you need to get you some good white people, because there was a point where that was the pinnacle of how you could get somewhere. And so Booker T. Washington is able to be with the Carnegies. He's able to be with people who can write checks. He can go to the White House. And that's a heady draft for a man at that time. I don't know how he felt internally, but I do know that externally, he was saying we need to just keep working. I'll do a wonderful place like Tuskegee, build it from the ground up, which means we could do architecture, but we're going to learn how to make mattresses. We're going to learn how to be subservient. We're also going to learn how to be the working class that the Carnegies need. The Carnegies aren't writing checks just because. There's no more enslavement,
Right.
and we need workers. So why don't you educate those workers real good? And these people needed jobs and they needed money. So Booker T had his reasonings, and I'm sure if I could delve into his life, many more. So this
Hmm.
is where he's coming from. And at a point, W.E.B. Du Bois is respecting Booker T. Washington. And then he goes, we need the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment now. He's going, look, you had that life, but we're coming up and I'm the next generation, and
Hmm.
I want my people to have more. And when we go talented 10th, yes, we can say it's elitist, but this is a time when they wanted no Blacks to have education. And he was saying, if I could just get a 10th of us educated, we
Hmm.
could pull up the rest of the people. And so that's the Booker T beef. Marcus Garvey is different. Marcus Garvey has amassed a following from around the world. And I don't delve into him much because I would have to frankly study him a lot more. But he is being investigated. He is being looked at as some of his claims are fraudulent. And what Du Bois says about him is basically, we are not getting on ships going back to Africa. And what Africa is there for us at this point, we are staying right here and we are demanding our rights here. And if you want to talk to people like the Klan, then I don't want to have anything to do with you, because maybe you're coming from a European and African background, but you don't understand that these people are a terror to us. And
Mhm.
so they had their conflicts. And Garvey, of course, had his movement, but Du Bois doesn't take any prisoners. He's against Woodrow Wilson. He's against 6 other presidents. He's very vocal about it. And if he's against Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey, be that deemed by others wrong or right, he doesn't agree.
Mhm.
And so I think those are those fights. And I think that there are many tensions. Now, in the end, uh, it's not in the documentary, but there was a time when somebody said something derogatory about Booker T. Washington to Du Bois, and he says, "Leave him alone. He was doing the best he knew how,"
Mhm.
and he felt that. He would later work with Marcus Garvey's wife.
Mm.
So he had the duality
Yeah.
of working across these lines. Our issue as a people, Black and white, is that we don't know enough. And
Mm.
so we hinge on 2 pieces of these arguments and unwittingly negate people, cancel people, when in effect, we don't know enough to do that. And so I think that famous people and their tensions are just like the tensions in our households, our churches, and our communities. Just because we're all Black doesn't mean we all agree.
Mhm.
But do we talk and do we listen to each other? And at a particular point, you have to take a stand for what you believe in.
No, I love that. I love the point that, Black thought is not this monolith. Like there is nuance. And I think one of the cool things that the documentary even points out is that, you know, Du Bois conflicts with Garvey over the Go Back to Africa movement and then dies in Ghana. There's,
Right?
there's a great sort of irony in people reevaluating, how we go forward. Um, and I think that's sort of one of the things I love the most. But this is probably the last question we have time for. And I think it'll be good if we sort of have a thesis for why you think people should see this film. So if there's one thing you want audiences to learn or gain from the documentary, one thing you want people to come away having watched it and take away, what would that be?
I would like Black people to realize how powerful they are, and that all of these efforts to take away history, either done by other people or done by themselves unwittingly, nobody would try to take something if it wasn't worth so much more. And so I want Black people to see their power. Du Bois was not an anomaly. It just appears that he is. You're coming up, Stone. Other people are coming up. You can do so much for your families and for yourself. So I want Black people to feel encouraged and positive in this moment. I want white people, particularly those who, I don't have a problem with the word woke, who are out here marching for right things and have an abolitionist spirit, to understand that in a society where any one group is being held under, your responsibility is to have the integrity not to do that. And if you can respect other people for what they bring, you can hire people differently. You cannot try to take everything. You can understand that other people, and Black people, particularly in this country, since we've picked the cotton, bundled the tobacco that makes all of these skyscrapers, that represent wealth, jobs, healthcare, futures. Why don't we own some of them? Why don't we have that? And it's because of this build up of privilege, microaggressions, and greed that this isn't a better America. That's what would make it a better America, not trying to hold us back, but to join with us and understand, as he says in the beginning of the film, I believe in God. I believe all men are brothers. what in this Constitution and that we're celebrating, how do we celebrate that and not celebrate it?
Thank you so much for coming on, Rita. It's been an honor to interview you. I'm so excited for Du Bois, Rebel with a Cause, to come out. Any last things you want to say to our viewers before we sort of call it a day?
I'd like them to watch this, and I'd like them to read more. I'd like them to know that they really can download most of those books and just do a couple of essays. But don't let other people stop you from what your history is and who you are. And that, when Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go higher. We need to go higher, deeper, stronger. We need to promote ourselves as opposed to in any way shy away in this moment. Art is dangerous. Art says we are here. Art is on the walls in Egypt. Art is saying we are here. This documentary is a taste of who you are, and you need to get the whole meal. You need to read, you need to talk to each other, you need to respect people and respect yourself and believe that you have the Black mind that is important for this time.
I think that's an excellent place to end on. Thank you so much, Rita. Thank you all for tuning in to Set in Stone with Linux and Parker. We'll see you guys next time.